So, according to David Wiley, quoted on George Siemens' blog, the prediction that 80% of all U.S. general education courses will be using OER instead of publisher materials by 2018.
In like 3 years?
That's what it says here.
Okay.
So George says, when it comes to openness, we have lots of people who really like it, but not a lot of research that actually supports it, which is fair enough. My concern is not so much about the success of OER in that context or whatever, but rather the fact that when we talk about open education, it means a lot of different things to different people. And I don't really care very much about open content. I care about open pedagogy. And I think that when people talk about open education, they tend to conflate the two.
Right.
Can you characterize both of those? So we talk to me about open pedagogy. What do you mean by that?
Sure. So open content.
Wait a minute, we should be. Are we recording this?
We are, and that was such a lovely intro. iHack 18, November 23rd.
We're all here. Hi.
Sick.
Dave,
Sick.
Jeff,
It's silly.
John's not here. Onward.
Onward.
So open content, and particularly when you talk about David Wiley's conception of open content, is about the licensing under which content is released. So if I write a textbook, and normally, according to American and frankly Canadian law and laws most places in the world, as soon as I write or produce anything, it automatically belongs to me. I get the copyright right away. We've been sharing things for millennia, but in the last 150 years, we've started putting licensing on stuff to make sure that authors get proper reward for the work that they do.
Royalties, blah, 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 blah.
Royalties, blah, blah. The open content movement is about trying to get open licensing on educational materials so that we can share educational materials rather than buy them, because there are cajillions of dollars every year being spent by governments on materials, frankly, that we already have. And particularly when we talk about them as digital materials, they shouldn't be costing anybody anything, because frankly, we're paying teachers to write materials and then selling that content 100,000 times over, when really we could all get ourselves together and get that stuff created and then give it away to people for free.
Right, which is what he, as you're saying, he's devoted as backfilling what you're saying. That's what his life has been devoted to. So let's like write one algebra textbook, get a nice copy out there to the community colleges, and the students won't pay for it, which is noble, wonderful, and great.
Totally. And there's lots of great projects out there. David himself was responsible for a great one that's since not there anymore at one of the, I forget the name of the university, but anyway, the Connections Project, for anybody who's interested, is a fantastic project. It's at Rice University. They do excellent work. And there's lots of really great stuff. There's a great project in BC that's being run by Clint Lalonde, who is doing really great. They've got 42, I think, texts that we're trying to use in K-12 right now, where the licensing is open. And that's really great. And I'm glad somebody has done that work, and I'm glad that work's been successful, but open pedagogy is a totally different process. For an open pedagogy, what we're talking about is thinking of learning as a process that is not defined. So one of the things I like to talk about is an open syllabus. So an open syllabus is one where it's actually negotiated between the students, between the person who is officially the instructor, and whoever else might be peripherally involved with that course. So that you're not necessarily pre-planned and pre-scripted. We haven't decided in advance what 25 people need to know. That's a collaborative, interactive process. It's a transparent process.
Mm-hmm.
Those two things.
And then there's actually a lot of gray in between, because then you could just have open enrollments. Athabasca considers themselves an open university, which is different than what you're talking about. It's really, because they're really a traditional university model, but some of the other typical closed systems are more open. But anyway.
Absolutely. So initially, the word open in education referred to widening participation. So it wasn't actually free, and it wasn't any of those things. It was committed to trying to get more people in England involved in the higher educational process, particularly, starting really in the late 60s and 70s. Weirdly, Margaret Thatcher is the person who saved open education in England, even though that's totally antithetical to her whole worldview.
So open pedagogy, we're talking kind of student-directed learning, where the student plays a role in the path they take.
So then when people talk about openness in education, we have openness that comes, what I think of as Silicon Valley openness, stuff that comes from the open, the open source history of open, where openness in this case is about the licensing being open and about people who are good enough being able to be involved in the process. Whereas the other kind of open comes more from the English tradition, which is more about bringing people in, inclusivity, and that kind of stuff.
So what is our question?
So the question is, I guess, is how can we talk about these things? And, well, one, does anybody agree with what I just said? And I think of OER and open content as dragging us back to a paper-centered world, and thinking of content as something that's finite and supports that old conception of knowledge, to me.
I think the most important thing is doing what we're doing. So whenever you go into a research project, whenever you go into a discussion of this, define this subset of the thing you're talking about. Because I love talking about the openness like you're saying, that like we talk about here almost every week. And then the pragmatic, practical side of me says, but yeah, we have these institutions that are there and they're not going anywhere anytime soon, so we do need to work on that. But I think the problem is, as you're saying, when we just use the word open, it gets muddled and muddy unless we say, okay, I'm talking about this box over here right now, and then these people are talking about this box over here. Because I think even going back to MOOCs, you know, what we had an idea of what a MOOC was, and then we saw a MOOC and we're like, wait a minute, that's not what we mean. So then those semantic definition discussions were incredibly important. And I think that's, to me, what I didn't read George's post, but from what you're saying, I think that's where the conversation has to start, is saying, this is what we're talking about, and this is what we want to research.
When you say the question is, do you agree with what I said? And I want to disagree, I really do. But so far, all I've gotten are definition of terms, that open can mean open content, and it can mean open pedagogy, which is this. So what is your point that I can disagree with, please?
Well, do you think that they can mean those things?
Sure. Okay.
Oh, yeah. I think absolutely. This is a good discussion. No, but I think what you're saying is incredibly important, because even again, I love to kind of bring the practical with and pragmatic with like the far out magical what could happen. And so even in my little world with my service learning projects, I have us release everything on an OER, Creative Commons license, I mean. And I think you kind of started out by saying that we're kind of all, or even maybe I think you quoted David Wiley saying, we're kind of already there, yeah, people are on board with that. Well, no, they're not. Students are like, wait a minute, I want to own this, I created it. And then you get into discussions about, well, what does it mean to own what you created? And our conversations we've had have really been in an echo chamber with a fairly small group of people, and I really kind of disagree with that thesis that we're all on board, even that we should have OER. And yet, I mean, maybe people are like, rah rah, I want it, until suddenly you're the one giving your stuff away, and then it's maybe a different conversation. But
in this case, they were claiming that the government's decided that they're going to do it.
Okay, gotcha. That's where that 80 whatever percent or whatever the heck you said. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I find that hard to believe, personally. It seems awfully soon. And it'd be great, because frankly, it's ridiculous that we pay textbook publishers for content.
What do you think the current, and that's something I can disagree with. So David Wiley said 80% of educational institutions are going to use open educational resources by 2018. I'm going to take the under on that. What do you think the current percentage is?
You know what? I would say probably 5 or 10, but I really don't know.
Much, yeah.
It's been moving so quickly lately. I would say that 4 or 5 years ago it was 0, and the bottom line is so good on OER that I think it's inevitable that there'll be more adoption. Um, it's just it's kind of a pain in the bum to make textbooks. So I think that people are going to find that it's a lot harder. A lot of the textbook projects have died. A lot of those things don't last. They require really strong organizations to hold them together. I don't think we've got really great solutions to those kinds of problems because the financial incentive is a good one. You know, it gets people to continue to make sure that this stuff gets updated.
Well, how much government involvement has happened so far? It seems to me that the state of California would save a lot of money if they said, okay, we're going to have open, this is the 12th grade math book, produce it once, and you don't have to pay so much out of the school budget.
Your state Department of Education has started releasing OER bids, and I think that's where a lot of this is coming from. My understanding is that there's been a fair amount of openness talk coming out from that end of things. Frankly, as I said before, the end of openness that I track as well. Here's a video by Aaron E. Duncan talking about open education, by which he means OER, by which he means open content.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to read George's thing. Can you paraphrase George's thing? I'm trying to read it and listen to you at the same time. So he really, what he's responding to really is David's comment about OER as a thing, like the content-based thing, right?
Well, I mean, what he's saying is that there are lots of people who jump up and down and say that openness is awesome. There's not a lot of research that actually supports that.
Okay, and when he says openness, he's responding though to David's OER as a content thing versus as an experience.
The point that I'm making. It's just the point that I'm making. In the opening sentence, he says, openness in education, including content, teaching, pedagogy, analytics, whatever, is doing this stuff. And then he goes on to talk about open content as if it somehow reflects all of those things.
Right. Okay.
And it's that lack of differentiation that I think is interesting in the way that people talk about openness. Because I think that like I say, open content's great, but open pedagogy is a whole other thing. And I think a far more powerful thing that's really only possible with the internet in place.
So what's going on with the research landscape into all of this, and how's your PhD going?
I am not in a PhD program, sir. I am contemplating such things. But there really isn't... It's going to be really hard to do that research, and I think that's why a lot of it hasn't been done. So if you talk about open pedagogy, and I try to do research into how much better my students are doing, we'd have to agree on what it means to succeed. And as a humanist, and as like in the humanities end of this, talking to a social scientist, it's almost impossible for us to come up with any kind of agreed upon.
Well, I mean, that's what researchers do. I mean, you can find some way to qualify something and research it, can't you?
No, you can, just not in a way that you're going to actually talk to anybody. This is the problem, right? So this is the first 6 months of my year this year working with the guys at MIT on the physics stuff. They're all past social science into science of humans stuff. And for them, if it's, their version of constructivism. To them, constructivism is student-directed as long as every step in the process is measurable. And if it's not measurable, it doesn't count.
Peggy as always raises a great point in the chat room. Are we kind of focused on higher ed, and if so, why?
Actually, she's right.
It just happens to be the end that I'm in.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I wish I knew more about anything else besides K-12. Fortunately, I sound really stupid once I get into like K-12 and outside of higher ed.
I'm working with the government here with high schools, trying to work on transition stuff to try to get people to try to think about where we're trying to go. They're calling it a grad planner. So how is it that I think about the last 4 years of my K-12 career to try to make sense of where I'm going to be when I come out of it?
Because I think the open content stuff stands, I think it'll continue to grow. across the different levels. I think open pedagogy is going to be a tougher road in K-12. In university, somehow the curriculum, the criteria is more flexible, whereas be it Common Core or something else, having students decide what they want to learn in high school is going to be a more challenging sell.
Well, you know what? There's another oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Genius Hour is certainly a movement that's an open pedagogy movement that's been in schools all over, particularly in the United States. But those kinds of endeavors are certainly expressions of open pedagogy. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, there's kind of a subset we haven't really talked about, and not my best examples probably are K-12, is, taking down the walled gardens and opening up the classroom to those outside of the people enrolled in the class and the teacher and the principals or whatever that are there, and even classrooms matching up with each other. But, I think we got all excited with Twitter that was, oh, wow, we're going to be able to get that layer of kind of expertise or whatever you want to say, where we're going to be able to get professionals in the field being able to come in and talk to our classes. So there's kind of openness that way to taking down those walled gardens, which gets away from kind of what you were talking about. But so Dave, do you care if I talk a little bit about our sidebar conversation when you and I were talking about the openness in terms of where we talking about we kind of get excited and fascinated by the numbers when we start thinking of like MOOCs and things like that aspect of openness, that wow.
You guys were talking without me?
We did. Sorry.
You didn't invite me at all.
It wasn't really talking, it was text typing. Don't get excited. But anyway, so to me that kind of bridges what I was just saying, that again, all these things have layers. It's like an onion, pulling them back and little categories and boxes and all these other metaphors. But what was I saying? Oh, so when I think about like non-MOOCs and the idea of openness, I'm thinking about what happens in kind of a smaller scale on a class, and again, how you can take down those walled gardens and open up the classroom to things that you normally don't experience when you're just working with your group of 25 people or whatever it may be. And I think that as far as thinking about a research base, I don't know why. It just, to me, logically sounds like you start where you are, and then you can kind of work your way out more from an adoption standpoint, where those who are going to be reading your work or thinking about what you're doing are going to be asking, well, what about me? Like, how can I apply what you're telling me in my own classroom right now? And that seems like a fairly logical place to start, is some of these experiences and practices that you can do now to open up your classroom beyond what it is with the walled gardens that we tend to put up around our classes. But anyway, that was kind of the way I interpreted part of our conversation, Dave, is kind of like the what about me aspect of where to start on research.
Yeah, I mean, 2 points there. One is, and in order to do that, you have to be willing to allow kids to learn things that you hadn't planned for them to learn. Right?
And meet people that you can't necessarily control what that person's going to say to them.
And for me, in terms of the research agenda, I could come up with my own sort of research methodology to go ahead and research the stuff that I do. The problem is that the people who already agree with me are going to be convinced by my research, and the ones who don't are going to look at the research the way that it's done and go, ethnography? That doesn't prove anything. How's it going to help test scores? And I'd be like, I don't care about your stupid test scores.
Or as soon as you start talking about it, they're going to start saying, well, we're going to need all the parents to sign an informed consent, blah, blah, blah. All these like logistics start creeping in that have to do with reality, and then pretty soon the conversation just kind of go, okay, well, let's just keep doing what we're doing.
And I find myself wondering about other stakeholders, like how can, the system doesn't change unless the people who care about it have a reason. Like here in Korea, the entrance exam is so key to moving on to whatever you want to do next that, this stuff isn't going to get off the ground here until that changes. And I'm wondering about, like, not that university education is only about getting a job, but I tend to think this kind of stuff serves future employers of students well. They want people who are self-directed learners. They want, I was listening to a podcast this week about how job interviews, they're starting, they've gotten a lot of personality tests, and they're starting to use gameplay that they find, kind of simulation games where they can see how people behave in a certain situation are very telling more so than some of the more traditional assessment methods. And I'm wondering if the corporate sector has weighed in on any of this.
Isn't that an interesting question? Um, we certainly get a fair amount of pressure from industry in terms of people's concerns about how well students are prepared for the workforce. I have argued at length that we need to do something about that. That's not just sending people to, essay writing tutorials, CV writing tutorials. That it's actually got to be experiential. You actually have to have something that makes sense. Um, hmm.
When is Google University going online? Google U. What would that look like?
Well, can I take a crack at your question? So, Jeffy, I think you were saying, talking about people being hired, and we talk about this a lot, thinking, because one of the reasons we're doing these applied learning opportunities is giving people a chance to practice what they'll one day do at work and show other people that they can do this and in a fairly realistic environment. And I think when people hire someone, they want to take the safe path. And so if you can look at somebody's transcript and say, wow, they have straight A's, no matter what the classes they took, you're probably on pretty solid ground back at your own company saying, well, the guy turned out to be a jerk, but, I based it off of transcripts. I did the best I could. Versus saying he didn't go to a traditional university. He has a degree from borrowing a class, it's this open class and this open class, and cobbling something together and calling it a degree. That's pretty risky for the hiring manager to then defend as they are looking at various candidates versus just being able to say, hey, this guy was straight A's at Harvard. Here's a piece of paper that shows that. And I think that's just a pretty practical consideration for what we're talking about.
They've hired a bunch of straight A jerks who wind up not working their company, and they pick some people up off free agency from wherever, and they turn out to be successful employees. Wouldn't that change things, or do the straight A students tend to do better in the workplace?
I don't know. I don't know if we know. I think it kind of gets back to what Dave's saying. Do we have enough research to know some of this stuff yet? What do people look like that go this non-traditional? Because as we're saying, there's all this content out there. So if you want to apply yourself, you can certainly go out and find it, and you can go on Twitter and meet people who are movers and shakers and doing this, and should be able to do it and get some support and help. But yeah, I don't know. I think, like I said, it's just the risky aspect. But go ahead.
I always think of this as the e-portfolio problem. There are people who believe that gathering together all the work that you do in university and putting it in a big package is somehow valuable to your future employer. I have never met this employer who wants to read your essays that you wrote in college. I imagine somebody must exist somewhere. I don't know where it started, but I've been.
But they Google people, don't they?
Oh, but that's different. When I go to hire somebody, I want to see what they just normally tweet. Yeah. I don't want to know what their professional tweeting's like. I want to know what their personal tweeting. Like, I want to get a sense of, like, what do they say about the football game?
That's the meaningful portfolio.
Are they
whining? I think it's the risk analysis. It's like, okay, what kind of risk am I taking on with this person? This guy sounds like a loose cannon because I've read some, that would be my,
totally.
Like you're saying, Dave, that's, I think, why most people Google. It's not to go out and try to find, like you said, the essay they wrote in some class.
What's the label for that aspect of openness? Let's go beyond the classroom. Open content and open pedagogy are in the classroom, but open living is the fact that we share so much of our digital lives.
Yeah, and for me, that's been very successful professionally. And for others, there are horror stories out there what that does for people. Alex had his identity taken a couple of times. Mm-hmm. But for so long, only people who were very rich, who had very specific kinds of access, lived open lives. So if you were the Prince of England, you essentially lived an open life. Your life was constantly tracked and whatever else. And if you were a Hollywood starlet 50 years ago, everybody knew everything about your life. But you also had all the connections you needed to be successful. Whereas now, we all have the potential, many of us, I mean, certainly there are people who are restricted in some ways or others, but have a chance to have these open, connected lives that can allow us to find new opportunities and new points of interest and all the rest of this stuff. And that's really cool. And I think I always tell students, and I talk to a lot of students about digital identity and stuff. I mostly tell them not to whine on the internet, because I think that as an employer, it's whiny people that I always dislike the most. That may just be a personal bias, but that learning how to present your identity in a positive way and still be human is maybe the best lesson we could be teaching people about with the openness. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, what do you think, Jeffy? What would you do if somebody came to you and said, I guess it also, how much work do you want to put into, because, okay, you asked the question before. I think there still is this, whether rightly or wrongly, if someone walks out the door with Harvard with a degree, there's this assumption that someone at Harvard was paying attention and said, yes, this student has some ability to do this thing that we're giving him a piece of paper that he or she says that we say that they can do. Where that burden falls to you to take those steps to say, yes, okay, this person's given me this laundry list of things they can do, and they're giving me this evidence, and then it's up to you to say, yeah, I agree. And I think that's just risky and more time-consuming right now. I don't know if we have an easy way to do that yet, but what do you think, Jeff? Like, what would?
Well, assuming I'm running a global media empire, let's say.
Okay, let's say. We kind of do, actually,
right? I would want to see their work. I want to, if we're looking for webcasters or people who manage websites, I want to see the websites they built. I want to see the media that they produced. That tells me a lot. I mean, the fact that they graduated from Harvard with a 4.0, hey, that tells me something too. That brings something to the table. But I want more. And the fact that someone graduated from whatever community college with a 3.0, they might have more interesting content. Depending on what you're looking for, maybe there is a correlation, but I want to see what they've done.
So that's really interesting. Okay, so let's just talk about this a second. So how much would you invest? Okay, say you have 10 candidates that sent in their applications. Like realistically, how much time would you spend evaluating the work products, or would you actually have them come in and test, do some
I would give them an assignment. I mean, I would first kind of screen them online. I'd read their resume, not just for the content, but how do they present themselves. I'm looking for a new media, talent here. So I want to see what their resume looks like. I want to know, I don't want a piece of paper. I want a multimedia resume. And then I want to see what they've done. And then in the next round, I'm going to say, okay, here's the hiring challenge. Produce a 3-minute piece or do a conversation about whatever. Go.
And we've talked about this before, so I think this actually is a cool thing to think about as far as a research agenda is we have our pie in the sky ideas, and we think from a learning standpoint, these things we're talking about are pretty cool, but how does that then translate to when reality hits and these folks need to find a job and get that? How can we help bridge that gap and help people like yourself, Jeff, with your multimedia empire, be able to assess the credentials of our people and what they're able to do and how they can apply
I think having a digital presence counts. I think if I Google your name and yourname.com comes up, good. You kind of control your presence a lot more than, a drunken picture from Facebook or whatever else.
And then but then it gets into what Dave was saying too. Because I was just about to say, then you have some type of portfolio or some examples of things you've done, and then it's a matter of. Okay,
I don't want to read the essay they wrote sophomore year.
Right, but you might want to see.
Unless I'm hiring a writer.
They developed or some such thing, right? So, Dave, what are you going to study? What do you want to research?
Oh, I'll be doing the rhizome stuff. And probably the thing I'm particularly interested in, and I don't know if I'll get away with doing it as a PhD topic, is the ways in which people have taken it up. So there are a number of people who've contacted me over the years and said, "Oh yeah, I'm doing this," or the stuff I'm doing is what you're talking about, and they're all really different from each other. And there's something I'd be looking for common threads, and also I'm interested in the idea of permission and how people have been given themselves permission to teach in this way, because that seems to be a big sticking point for people. Where,
from the instructor standpoint?
yeah, where I will give a talk and somebody will come up to me and say, "I've been thinking about doing this for years, but now that you've said it, I think I'm going to go ahead and do it."
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I'm interested in how that happens and what that reflects. Because, I mean, the stuff I talk about is not really complicated and it's not very new. And the people who are talking to me are very well educated. And I don't understand where there's something about that story that works for some people, and I'm trying to figure out what it is. I guess is the easiest way to describe it.
I know we're out of time, but this gets back to that question you and I were kind of going. So you're very much thinking of tackling this from the where we are right now versus to me, MOOCs were more like, where could we be? How could we get 5,000 people together to learn together? But it doesn't seem like you're as interested in that aspect as more, I mean, from right now, for what you would be studying, as you are saying, okay, here's where we are now, how can we start chipping away at that in a new way, right? Is that, or am I not?
I think that PhD would get done faster.
Yeah, I agree.
Though right now, right, and I think that wouldn't preclude me from taking a run at the other piece, but future stuff has a tendency to get crazy, whereas
crazy.
I want to get it done.
Yep.
If I start, I want to get something that's manageable that I can actually finish.
Which I think that's really important, though, too. I mean, rarely do things just go, whoa, just like shoot out there. Like we're talking about Jeff hiring his non-degreed whatever person. That's risky. I think those are risky things for people to take on, and maybe it's a good idea to chip away at stuff.
I just want to say I like the way this young Cormier kid changed his video filter into black.
I know, it's
nice
very
dichotomy, progressive ideas, old style look.
I'm getting old.
I just thought it was old. I just thought maybe, he doesn't have color anymore. So are we all in our 40s? Jeffy, when do you turn 50?
I got a couple more years, a year and a half.
Me too. I turn 48 next, 30 days.
I also, in closing, would like to say I can't believe it's been 2 weeks and no one has noticed my new do.
Well, I noticed your do. You cut it for Halloween, I thought.
There was still ponytail there, but now there's nothing.
I didn't know that. Well, we can't see that part.
You got to spin around more often.
You do have to spin around. Awesome.
I'm 0% power, folks.
All right, I guess
well, enjoy your birthday.
I will.
For now.
Thanks, Peggy.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Peggy.